Welcome to Mental Health Momentum, a Silicon Slopes podcast. I'm Dr. David Morgan. I'm a licensed psychologist and the Director of Mental Health Awareness at Silicon Slopes. On this podcast, we talk about the impact of mental health on businesses as individuals, and we look for solutions as well. And today I'd like to introduce my guest, Cameron McBride. Cameron, welcome.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Cameron has spent his career in specializing in healthcare operations and the impact an organization's processes have on its success. He joined Blomquist Hale in 2019 as the CEO. Prior to joining Blomquist Hale, Cameron worked for Valley Behavioral Health, which is the largest behavioral health organization in Utah. Prior to this, he worked for HCA, which is the largest hospital company in the United States. Cameron has the Bachelor's of Science degree from Utah State University and an MBA degree from the University of Utah. I just realized I'm wearing my BYU shirt, so hopefully with this conversation will continue to go well.
I think we're good.
Okay. Cameron and his wife have 4 children, ages 14 to 22. In addition to spending time with his family, Cameron enjoys pickleball and building, repairing, and riding motorcycles. Nice. Cameron, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Good to be here.
I'll tell you a little story about our son is doing his doctorate at the University of Louisville in Kentucky. And we went there to look at the campus, and I was wearing a shirt. I was careful not to wear any BYU branded stuff because I thought, you never know. But I had a shirt on just as blue as this one, a royal blue shirt. And so we walked into the building where he was going to have most of his classes, and it's just crimson everywhere. And as red as the University of Utah, that exact same red. They're the Cardinals, and their biggest rival is University of Kentucky, which is a BYU blue. And so I realized I'm walking around campus in the absolute wrong color. So I have 2 very red shirts right now. I do. I probably should have worn it today. That I'm proud to wear.
It's good you weren't escorted off campus, I guess.
Yeah, really. and believe it or not, I just went to the University of Utah for the first time. Just a month ago. We were up at Libby Gardner Hall recording something. It's a beautiful campus.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah.
And it's changed a lot in the last,
I bet.
20 years since I've been there.
Yeah. BYU has too. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. They keep growing, don't they?
They do. Yeah. Well, so tell us a little bit, besides what we talked about in the bio, about yourself and your background, how you got into this line of work.
Yeah, after I finished graduate school at the University of Utah, I began working at an organization that provided residential treatment services for teens. And that was my first exposure to the mental health world.
Were you as like a counselor or as an administrator?
Yeah, as an administrator.
Okay.
So I was hired there as the director of operations, and I did that for a year and a half, and then the director of the facility. And it was a cool facility. It was a 500-acre campus. And it was out in the middle of nowhere, and we had horses and did equine therapy and an indoor riding arena and cattle, and the kids all learned how to work on the farm, and we had a school on site and non-denominational chapel. It was a great campus. And so after he retired, the director, I was promoted to be the director, and it was a huge learning experience, for someone especially that was fairly new out of school and operations being my background. I now had responsibility for the whole organization there, that campus. I learned a ton, and I learned an appreciation for mental health and what it means to be a good clinician, knowing that I'm not one, but I've worked with a lot to identify what is good and what maybe not so good. And it takes a special person to really be able to identify and help people that are struggling with their mental health.
So your interest started there, and then you did you kind of intentionally go into mental health related fields after that in those subsequent jobs, or did you just go where the job was? Or?
Yeah. So I actually just kind of followed the job. So from there, my wife and I decided we wanted to come back to Utah. And so I ended up coming back to Utah and working in more the physical health arena. Did that for quite a few years. And a lot of great experiences there, and then ended up back in mental health after doing that for probably 14 or 15 years, then got back into mental health, and I've been doing that ever since. And, it's interesting because it's not, when I went to school, that wasn't my goal, that, hey, I wanted to work in mental health. It just kind of ended up that way. And I love working in an arena where we have the opportunity to help people daily, especially where I get to use my skills to do that, even though I'm not necessarily providing direct care, is a great experience.
tell us a little bit about the company, Blomquist Hale. So it's an EAP provider, right?
Yeah.
To make sure people understand what that is.
Yeah. So Blomquist Hale, what we do is we work with companies and their employees to provide services. Most of them are related to mental health, but not all of them. So it can be everything from, dealing with stress and anxiety and depression, some of those things that we think about with mental health, but also it could be substance abuse or addiction. It could be dealing with grief or loss. It could be dealing with burnout from your work.
Mm-hmm.
It could be dealing with financial struggles. It could be legal struggles. We tell, when we're talking with employees, we tell them, come see us with any of life's challenges. Give us a call. We'll make sure you get some assistance. The challenge that we see is, for some people, making that phone call, reaching out to us can be a scary thing.
Yeah.
And we get that. And we want to make it something where it's not as scary so that people are willing to reach out before it becomes a crisis. Once it becomes a crisis, it's much more challenging to help them through it. We'd rather they call them when they are just dealing with some burnout or some stress, or they've lost a loved one and they want somebody to talk to. And that's where we can come in and then spend a lot of time with those individual employees, helping them to develop tools to manage their mental health.
I think as a society, I hope we're slowly moving in that direction where we're willing to ask for help before it becomes a crisis. Because you're absolutely right. Once you've crossed that line into wherever that tipping point is, and it can be different for anyone, whatever crisis area we call it, that it's much, much more difficult to manage. And I think from a clinician standpoint, it's more difficult to manage, and also from the individual standpoint, because they just feel so depleted. And there's just this sense of panic and urgency, as opposed to, it's like running from a bear, basically, and, and you can't take a lot of time to think about, and what should I do here? It's just survival.
Yeah. There's so much of that. I think one of the things that we have to do is to better educate people so that they do recognize the signs before it becomes a crisis.
Yeah.
And that requires effort, and it requires us sometimes talking about things that maybe we've been hesitant to talk about in the past. And I think we're getting better at that, but we got a ways to go.
100%. Yeah. I think we are getting better at it. And it was like, I remember talking to a friend years ago, and he said, trying to change these societal issues, it's like an aircraft carrier trying to turn around. He said it takes 7 miles for that thing to turn around. It's not a jet ski, it just takes such a long period of time to move. But it starts with each one of us, right?
Yeah.
And setting an example for people, being willing to be vulnerable and to talk about things, talk about the challenges in our lives. I'm not saying we have to, get T-shirts with our diagnoses on them or anything like that, but just acknowledging the fact that life is difficult, and we're not always perfectly equipped to deal with everything that comes our way, and that's okay.
Yep.
And we should reach out for help.
Yeah. And I would say, especially if we have a leadership role. Sometimes we, as leaders, we try to put on this perfect face. But we have weaknesses too. We have those same vulnerabilities. Leaders struggle with some of these same challenges. And if we're willing to be the ones to talk about that, hopefully those that are maybe not at this point willing to say something might be willing to open their mouth,
right,
and reach out or get some assistance, because they see that, hey, this can impact anybody, and it's not unusual that it's happening to me.
Is that something you talk about with businesses as you're working with them? Because obviously you're going to be interacting with the leaders as you're, getting contracts and business and stuff like that. Helping them understand. I mean, if there's a culture in the company that nothing ever goes wrong and we cope all the time, then they're less likely to reach out for services and more likely to end up in crisis, because a culture like that just doesn't exist. Things go wrong all the time.
Yeah.
And helping people, like you said, realize that earlier. So I'm sure do you find differences from company to company?
Yeah, definitely differences. And a lot of it is that willingness to talk about it, that willingness to be vulnerable. And, so what we like to see is, when an organization has got, hopefully they've got a mental health, partner with their organization, which is what we do. We like to go in and partner with organizations to help their employees. If you're trying to check a box just to say, hey, yeah, we've got a benefit for our employees, I don't think that's the ideal way to approach it. Rather, you need a partner. And what that partner should be doing is spending time with the leadership of the organization and talking about what they can do as leaders to support their people. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. sometimes as leaders, we think, well, I don't want to talk about it with my employee because then I have to fix it.
Right.
That's not true. No one's expecting you to fix their mental health problem. And hopefully, if you're partnering with an organization that can help provide those services, they're the ones that can solve the problem. You've just got to make the connection.
Right.
And so it's important that we spend a lot of time with leaders helping them understand how to make the connection. What are the signs that you're looking for with your people that may be having a mental health struggle? You've got someone that may be showing up till late to work every day. It may be because they've got something going on in their life that they're trying to figure out how to manage.
Right.
And what can we do to get them connected with someone to help them with that? So it's not just about helping the individual, but it can also have implications on performance and productivity. And as a leader, we have a responsibility to help people with that. And I think that as a leader, we not only have a responsibility to help our people be productive, but really to live better lives.
Yeah.
And if we're connecting to those resources, we can do that. And so like what we like to do, we like to meet with every organization we work with. We like to meet with our leadership team at least once a year and sit down with them and talk to them and help them understand what are the things you're looking for. What are you doing to make sure that you truly have an open door policy and people feel like that they can come talk to you? Now, no one's expecting you to be their therapist. You don't need to be asking questions that may be of personal nature or specific to their mental health personally, but rather, what are your struggles? Let's see if we can get you connected with someone that can help you. And there are also times where it may be that their performance is having some struggles and they're not necessarily wanting to make that connection. And as a leader, how can we teach you to encourage them to reach out and make that phone call? That being said, at least at our organization, we are perfectly fine with being the ones to make the call too. You know, if a leader knows somebody is struggling and they've gotten the permission from that person to give them our phone number or give their phone number to us, we'll make the phone call and we'll have that conversation. We've had a couple of instances where fortunately good leaders have taken steps to help address that. I was visiting an organization that we work with that is a manufacturing company. So they've got a large manufacturing plant, and so they've got a lot of employees that are in there. And there was one particular day where there was a gentleman that had made a comment to his colleague. Fortunately, he said something that he had planned to take his life after work that day. This colleague was quick to go to their HR department and tell them what was going on. They went and got the employee that made the comment, brought him into the office. Now, as the HR person, they were a little bit nervous about what to do. What do I do in this situation? The fortunate thing is they reached out to us. We were able to get a clinician on the phone. And as the HR person described it to me, the clinician was asking questions I would have never thought to ask. We were able to get that guy some help. He ended up being admitted in his case. But I was there a few months later, and he was back to work, and he was doing great. And had that colleague not said something, who knows what could have happened. Right. And so those instances happen. And I think our role as not only as leaders, but as colleagues and friends, when we know someone's struggling, are we taking initiative to maybe say something if they're not?
Right. Kind of initiating that conversation is so important. And you were talking about earlier about how sometimes leaders say, well, if we don't talk about this, then we don't have to fix it, right? And the fallacy there is that almost if we don't talk about it, then it's just not existing. But it does exist. It exists all over the place. And the important thing to do is talk about it because it's more than just bottom line. It's, like you said, it's quality of life and other things. And I mean, I guess from a purely capitalistic perspective, the better quality of life, the better the bottom line most of the time anyway, right? I mean, happier employees, more content, all of that.
Well, and just the culture it creates within a work environment too. If people know that their employer cares about them and supports them and helps them, it just develops a better culture. That culture not only leads to productivity, but it also leads to better retention of your employees and the ability to recruit. I mean, there's all these benefits to having a good culture. And if you're one that demonstrates that we care about our people and their mental well-being, that can go a long ways in developing that culture. And it has implications, I believe, all along the, kind of facet of a work environment.
Right. My guess is you kind of have to put your money where your mouth is when it comes to that. I mean, it's one thing to have policies and procedures and mission statements and those sorts of things, but people get a sense pretty quickly of whether they feel if they're cared about or whether they feel if if things are actually reflecting what is being stated, at kind of from a top-down level. So I love that you work with the business leaders as well, just to kind of help them understand. And I imagine that there's some that's probably very natural for them, and there's others that it's probably not nearly as natural, right?
Yeah. Yes, for sure. And there's all kinds of factors that contribute to that.
Yeah.
It could be the way they've been taught to be a leader or experiences they've had that can contribute to that. But the thing that's interesting, and you've heard this phrase before, people leave their supervisor, not their company, when they're leaving an organization. And so what are we doing to make sure that the supervisor is providing the type of support and leadership and environment where people aren't leaving because of them?
Right.
And sometimes that means that supervisors have to change the way they're doing things. It also means sometimes, though, it can be hard if you're the employee that feels like you're not getting that support from your leader or your supervisor. And sometimes being willing to speak up can be a hard thing, a really hard thing, especially if it's someone that's maybe reluctant to have those conversations in the first place. But the amazing thing about it, though, is if you're willing to say something, oftentimes it can be something that has long-term benefit for multiple individuals, not just you. I had an experience with that. This is quite a few years ago. I worked for an organization, and the CEO of the organization didn't provide that kind of support, and to a point that it was almost neglectful. I'm trying to be careful about my words, but and it took a brave employee that was willing to stand up, because the CEO's boss is the board of directors,
Right.
and this brave employee was willing to say something to the board of directors in a situation that was very scary, and it actually turned out to be a great thing. Things were changed, and it ended up having implications for an organization that had 800 employees, because someone was willing to speak up. Now, it's hard, and I'm making it sound easier than it is, but it can be worthwhile.
Well, in almost every case, when someone does speak up and point out something that, maybe isn't happening exactly the way it should, usually only good things come from that. It's change, it's awareness of problems. And if we're unaware of the problem, there's nothing we can do about it, or you wouldn't do anything about it anyway, because there is no problem.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So when you have employees that are struggling, and like you said, you want them to reach out earlier than later, are there roadblocks that you find, common roadblocks why employees might not reach out for mental health services?
I would say one of the most common is fear, and so there's, I think, some ways to try and work through that. One of them is if your mental health partner with your organization is willing to come in and spend time with your employees in education and training or whatever, it gives the employee a sense that maybe these guys aren't so scary after all. I've been able to spend some time with them. I've been able to see what they do. I've been able to get a better understanding of what they can support me with. And it seems to help them overcome that fear. And then some people, it might be someone else that's kind of holding their hand through it. One of the things that we've also noticed that really helps with that is when, and we have to be careful about this, but when someone has had a good experience, when they're willing to share. Now, they don't need to share details of what's going on with their struggle, but those people that are willing to say, hey, I was struggling, I went and talked to somebody, and it made a huge difference in my life and helped me to develop some tools that have helped me to succeed where otherwise I felt like I was failing. People resonate to that, especially if it's a colleague, or a leader. Really, it doesn't matter. If anybody's willing to say that, it's helpful. But that's, not always. Some people are great at advocating for, therapy or providing mental health assistance, and others, don't want anybody to know they have anything to do with it.
Right.
But I think we're, as we touched on a moment ago, as a society, I think we're making progress. The taboo of mental health is breaking down.
Yeah.
We've got a ways to go still, but it is breaking down, and people are more willing to talk about it. But as we talked about earlier, a lot of that in the workplace comes down to that culture.
Yeah.
On how willing people are to talk.
I found what I think is an interesting phenomenon with mental health, because on the one hand, you have the taboo, which I think we're kind of slowly chipping away at. On the other hand, I see kind of this radical shift to the complete other side, where people are 100% willing to admit their mental health issues. Like I said, T-shirt style, right? Here's all my diagnoses and that. And then almost to the point of, and therefore I can't do these things because I'm afflicted with these conditions. And I, I've been, as a psychologist, been, working in mental health for 30 years, and there's always something that someone can do. There's always
Yeah.
something you can do to get better, even if it's just a little bit better. You may never completely manage your mental health issues over the course of your life, but you can manage them 30% or 40% or 50%, depending on the person. Some people overcome them altogether. But I think it's equally unhelpful to be, on the one hand, I'm not going to talk about this at all, and on the other hand, I'm so broken that there's nothing I can do to fix it. They're both paralyzed, because why go get help because I can't fix it. And so the middle is always where it needs to be, right? Somewhere in the middle.
Well, I think that's an indicator of a good clinician, when they're able to help someone that feels like there's no hope, to develop some hope. And what are those things that you can start doing now? Because I agree with you. There are things. There's something that you can be doing now, and a good clinician will be able to help them identify that, and then really identify what are some little steps that I can start working on today. And I think too, if you're really serious about helping someone, they're probably going to walk out of that office with some homework. Here's some things that I'm going to have you work on. Let's talk again after you've been able to work on it for a couple of weeks, and let's see what's worked. If it's worked, great, we're going to build on it. If not, let's try something different. But let's not give up hope yet. There's opportunity for you to make some progress. Let's get you there.
I love that idea of accountability, and even the idea of giving someone an assignment. There's implicitly a message there that you're capable of this. I know you can do this. This is why I'm giving you this assignment. And so there's that kind of undercurrent of confidence and just communicating to them that they're capable. I think that's great. I think that is a mark of a good clinician.
Yeah.
Cameron, there's going to be some people listening to this who have very, very small businesses who aren't going to, maybe necessarily need an EAP or be able to afford an EAP. What can they do to help kind of promote mental health in their workplace? What ideas would you have for them?
The good thing is that EAP services and mental health services have become more accessible for employers than it's ever been. So even the small organizations, there is ways to do it, and do it affordably. In fact, we have multiple organizations we work with that have 20 or less employees.
Oh, okay.
The amount of resources that are available is better than it's ever been.
Right.
So there's a lot of different options. And so, if you're not connected to an EAP, there are those resources you can tap into. The great thing about the amount of knowledge that exists out there, the hard thing though is identifying, what is good to tap into and what's maybe not so good. But so many people are dedicated to helping those that are struggling with mental health. There's so many organizations in our communities that are focused and geared towards mental health, that if an organization doesn't have a mental health partner, you can reach out to those nonprofit organizations and they can help you, direct you to the tools that are beneficial and helpful. The good thing is that most organizations, if you're providing any sort of benefits for your employees, chances are the organization that you're using to get those benefits, typically it's a benefits broker, will also have access to affordable EAP options or something that's going to work. But really, though, what we're finding is there are still organizations out there that commit the financial resources to a mental health partner and then are not fully utilizing it. And sometimes it's hard to understand. You're paying for it. You just will use it, right? And so that's an opportunity for that mental health partner to go in and educate and say, we don't need you to do it. Let us do the work, but we want to get in front of your people. We want to have these conversations. We want to talk to them about what it means to access mental health resources. And it doesn't need to be a scary thing. Sometimes it is, but we can help you overcome that. We were talking a minute ago about, what are you doing to help people understand that maybe having that reluctance? There are so many opportunities to be in front of people and to talk to them about what those resources are. And some people, those resources are easily accessed by having a face-to-face conversation. For others, that's not a good fit for them. And so maybe it's going to be something that's virtually, or maybe there's an app-based service that works well for them. We just want to connect with people with wherever they're comfortable. And whatever ease of access that is for them, we'll take that route with them. And then maybe grow from there. But we want to make sure that people are feeling like there are resources available that can be easy for them to access, not just for them as an individual, but if they've got a child that's struggling, or it's an aging parent, or they're having a problem with their relationship. ignore those just because it's not you as an individual. There's also tons of resources in those circumstances as
Right.
well.
That's such good advice. And as I was reflecting on the question, even after I asked it, I thought, in my life, I love experts. I love hiring people to do things that I don't know how to do. There's some things I can learn how to do. I remember when I first tried to change my brakes 25 years ago, and I'm not a mechanic, and it took me like 8 hours and I still didn't do it right. And then I learned very quickly that I could probably go to find someone reasonably affordable who could do that for me. He could do it much better. And maybe with mental health, maybe that's the way that businesses need to perceive that as well. Look to the experts.
Yeah.
Look to there's a lot of expertise out there, like you said, even in the form of just nonprofit agencies that have developed curriculums and other things saying, look, here's a place to start. And then if they choose to, if they're providing benefits, man, get behind that, utilize it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what's the point of paying for it if it's just sitting there unused?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that does completely doesn't help anybody.
It doesn't compute. No, it really
does
doesn't.
not compute. Exactly.
Yeah. And so much of it too, though, is I think there's still, we all have a lot of personal bias still,
Mhm.
and so we'll notice within certain individuals that are struggling to reach out, or even certain organizations, it's so much related to the individual that's maybe steering people one direction or another. And if I look back at my own life, and I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit this, but when I was young and going through college, before I really kind of started getting into this world, I just kind of had a little bit of the perspective of, pull yourself up by your bootstraps,
Mhm.
you're going to be fine. And I realize now that that's not the way it works.
Right.
And that mentality, I think, was prevalent, when I was in college 25, 30 years ago.
That's why I was changing my own brakes, because I was just pulling myself by my bootstraps,
Yeah,
right?
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so we're all having to make this shift. And some people are making that shift quicker than others, realizing that it's just not that simple.
Yeah.
And there's some real struggles, and people use the analogy, I'm sure you've heard it before, if you broke your arm, you wouldn't just tell yourself, well, deal with it,
Right.
buck up, you'd go see a doctor. And not only that, but you wouldn't have any hesitation about going to see a doctor about a broken arm.
Right.
There's just no hesitation. That's what you do when you're broken or you're sick, you go see a doctor. Still trying to understand that with the mental health side of things, that, maybe there is something that an expert could help me with, like a doctor would with my broken arm. And that we're trying to get over the fear and, the stigma, and it's okay. Go see somebody, they can help you.
And as a psychologist, I can assure you that is 100% true. we know things. We know things better than other people, at least in the mental health space.
Yeah.
That's our expertise. That's what we've been doing. And you can come to us and we will help you with things that otherwise you go, wow, I never considered that before. Happens all the time.
Yeah.
I love it.
And really, you use the example of your brakes. I can go on YouTube and watch a video on how to fix my brakes. But when it comes to mental health services, it's not that easy.
That's not going to happen.
It's not a
Yeah,
checklist. Okay, well, first you take the tire off. It
Right.
just doesn't work that way.
No.
And so experts like yourself are so needed. And I think we're remiss if we think we can figure it out on our own.
Yeah.
Not saying we shouldn't try things. We should. If you've tried some stuff and it seems to be working, great. But don't miss an opportunity to get some expertise to help you.
Yeah. That's why I eventually had to take that car in to have someone fix the brake job that I had done. It cost me twice as much as it should have. Well, Cameron, thank you so much for this conversation. I appreciate you coming in, and just the valuable insights as well. The services your company is providing are especially important now. Mental health issues are increasing. We're bringing them to work, and so let's fix them. Let's figure out a way to do something about it.
Yeah, and there's, as you just touched on, the need is growing, and I don't know, and I think it's partially because as a society we're struggling more, also because people are willing to talk about it, and let's make sure that we're making the best of the resources that exist within our communities to address it.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. And thanks to everyone for listening today. We invite you to come back to future podcasts and listen as well. Remember that change starts with you, and we all work together to increase our mental health momentum.